Have you ever wondered how an ordinary city can suddenly become known for one of the darkest criminal cases in a nation's history? In Nigeria, there is one name that still echoes through conversations nearly 3 decades later. A name that, for many, symbolizes fear, unanswered questions, and a tragedy that changed countless lives. That name is Otokoto. But what really happened? Was it simply a criminal case that grew into a national headline, or was there more to the story than people first understood? To answer that, we have to travel back to the city of Owerri in the mid-1990s. At the time, Owerri was changing rapidly. Businesses were opening, hotels were attracting visitors, and the city was becoming a destination for trade and entertainment. To many, it represented opportunity. Families worked hard to build better lives, while children attended school and, like in many Nigerian communities, some helped their parents by selling small items after class. Life wasn't perfect, but it moved at a familiar pace. Then, quietly, something began to change. Across different neighborhoods, stories started to spread. Families spoke of people who had disappeared without explanation. Some reports reached the police. Others remained whispered conversations shared in markets, churches, and roadside gatherings. As often happens in moments of uncertainty, facts mixed with rumors, making it difficult to separate truth from speculation. At the same time, another topic dominated conversations. Some individuals appeared to become wealthy with astonishing speed. New mansions rose where empty plots once stood. Luxury cars became common sights. Expensive hotels and businesses seemed to appear almost overnight. Of course, success alone does not prove wrongdoing. Many people earned their wealth through legitimate businesses. But for residents already living with fear, the timing raised difficult questions. Could these events be connected? Or was it all just coincidence? Among the businesses attracting attention was a well-known establishment called Otokoto Hotel. To most people, it was simply another hotel in a growing city, a place where travelers checked in, meetings were held, and daily business carried on. No one could have imagined that its name would one day become known across the entire country. As weeks passed, concern among residents continued to grow. Parents became more protective of their children. Many warned them never to follow strangers, no matter how friendly they seemed. Street hawkers, who relied on selling snacks, fruit, or groundnuts to support their families, were told to return home before sunset. Fear had begun to influence everyday life. Then came a day that would change everything. It was September 19, 1996. For 11-year-old Anthony Ikechukwu Okoronkwo, the morning began like any other. He left home carrying packets of groundnuts, hoping to earn a little money to help his family. Nothing about that morning suggested it would become one of the most remembered days in Owerri's history. Anthony walked through busy streets, calling out to potential customers as vehicles passed and markets buzzed with activity. He had done this before. It was part of his daily routine. But according to investigators, sometime that afternoon, he met someone who appeared to be just another customer. Police later alleged that the man invited Anthony into the compound of Otokoto Hotel under the pretense of buying what he was selling. For a young boy trying to make a sale, there may have seemed little reason to refuse. Anthony followed. It was the last confirmed time he was seen alive by anyone outside the hotel. No one on those crowded streets realized they had just witnessed the beginning of a case that would shake an entire nation. As evening approached, Anthony's family expected him to return home, just as he always did. The sun began to set. Neighbors gathered outside their homes. Shops started closing for the day. But Anthony never came back. At first, his family assumed he had stayed out a little longer to make a few more sales. Another hour passed, then another. Concern quickly turned into panic. They searched nearby streets, visited familiar places, and asked traders if anyone had seen the young boy carrying a tray of groundnuts. Some remembered seeing him earlier that day. After that, the trail went cold. While Anthony's family searched desperately for answers, investigators say another chain of events was unfolding elsewhere in the city. According to the police investigation, a hotel employee named Innocent Ikechukwu was later alleged to have been sent to transport evidence connected to the crime. He reportedly left carrying a tightly wrapped bag and boarded a commercial motorcycle. During the journey, something unusual caught the rider's attention. The passenger appeared nervous. His behavior seemed out of place. Growing suspicious, the motorcycle rider alerted nearby police officers. The officers stopped the motorcycle and carried out a search. What they discovered immediately transformed what had been a missing person case into a major criminal investigation. The suspect was arrested. Within hours, word began spreading through Owerri. People gathered in small groups outside homes, shops, and police stations, trying to understand what had happened. At first, many dismissed the report as another rumor. But this time, the authorities had opened a formal investigation. And for the first time, residents began to believe that the disturbing stories they had been hearing for months might have a real and deeply troubling explanation. What investigators uncovered next would ignite public outrage and change the city forever. The arrest marked a turning point. Investigators immediately began following every lead they could find. Questions that had once been dismissed as neighborhood gossip were now being treated with urgency. Their attention quickly turned to Otokoto Hotel. Officers searched the premises, questioned staff members, and gathered evidence they believed could help explain Anthony's disappearance. As the investigation expanded, more people were brought in for questioning. Among them was Vincent Duro, the owner of Otokoto Hotel, along with several other individuals whose names would later appear in court proceedings. News of the arrest spread with incredible speed. Before social media existed, information traveled through radio broadcasts, newspaper headlines, and word of mouth. At bus parks, in marketplaces, and outside churches, everyone seemed to be discussing the same story. Some people believed investigators had uncovered only a small part of a much larger operation. Others urged caution, reminding everyone that arrests were not the same as convictions. But as public attention intensified, so did public anger. For many residents, the investigation seemed to confirm the fears they had lived with for months. Families who had reported missing loved ones began asking whether their own cases might somehow be connected. Whether those fears were supported by evidence or not, emotions were now running higher than ever. Owerri had become a city waiting for answers. And then, those emotions spilled onto the streets. What happened next would become known as one of the most dramatic public uprisings in the city's history. It began with small gatherings. Groups of residents stood outside shops, discussing the latest reports. Every new newspaper headline seemed to raise more questions than answers. As the hours passed, those small gatherings grew into crowds. Thousands of people poured into the streets of Owerri. Some came to demand answers. Others wanted justice for Anthony and for every family affected by unexplained disappearances. The atmosphere was tense. Many believed they had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. Despite efforts by security personnel to maintain order, emotions continued to rise. Soon, the crowd made its way toward Otokoto Hotel. For many protesters, the building had become a symbol of everything they believed had gone wrong. The situation quickly escalated. Parts of the hotel were set on fire, and thick smoke rose into the sky. As the unrest spread, several other properties believed by protesters to be linked to suspects were also attacked and damaged. It is important to remember that public anger can move faster than the legal process. Not everyone accused of involvement was ultimately found guilty in court, and later appeals changed the outcome for some defendants. By the time security forces restored order, Owerri had experienced one of the most significant episodes of civil unrest in its history. The city looked different. Businesses had been damaged. Families were shaken. And the name Otokoto had become known across Nigeria. But while the riots dominated the headlines, the real battle was only beginning. that battle would take place, not in the streets, but inside a courtroom, where evidence, not emotion, would decide the outcome. In the months that followed, the focus shifted from the streets to the courtroom. The case had captured the attention of the entire country. Every hearing drew journalists, lawyers, and members of the public, all hoping to understand what had really happened. For Anthony's family, however, the trial was never about public attention. It was about seeking justice for an 11-year-old boy whose life had ended far too soon. Prosecutors presented the evidence they had gathered during the investigation. Defense lawyers challenged that evidence, questioned part of the investigation, and argued that their clients were not responsible for the crimes alleged. The proceedings lasted far longer than many expected. Witnesses were called. Documents were examined. Arguments were made and challenged. The court carefully weighed each piece of evidence before reaching its conclusions. During this period, another unexpected development added to the complexity of the case. Innocent Ikechukwu, the hotel employee whose arrest had helped launch the investigation, died while in police custody before the trial concluded. His death raised serious questions. Authorities later determined that he had been poisoned, and years afterward, 3 police officers were convicted in connection with his death. It was a reminder that the pursuit of justice also requires accountability from those entrusted to enforce the law. As the years passed, Nigerians waited for the moment that would finally answer the question everyone had been asking. What would the court decide? After years of legal proceedings, the court finally delivered its judgment. Several defendants, including Vincent Duro, the owner of Otokoto Hotel, and Leonard Onegu, were convicted and sentenced to death. For many Nigerians, the verdict marked the end of a long and painful chapter. Outside the courtroom, reactions were mixed. Some believed justice had finally been served. Others argued that every conviction should continue to be tested through the appeal process, especially in cases carrying the most severe penalties. Under Nigerian law, those sentenced to death had the right to appeal. And they did. The case moved through higher courts, where judges carefully reviewed the trial, the evidence, and the legal arguments presented by both sides. The appeals lasted for years. During that time, some convictions were upheld. Others were overturned after the court found the evidence against certain defendants was not sufficient to sustain a conviction. These decisions reinforced an important principle of justice. Every accused person deserves a fair trial, and guilt must be established by evidence rather than public opinion. One convicted defendant, Leonard Onegu, died in prison before his sentence could be carried out. Vincent Duro remained on death row for many years. Then, in 2016, nearly 20 years after the events that had shocked Owerri, his death sentence was carried out, bringing the legal process to its conclusion. But even after the court had spoken, the story of Otokoto was far from over. Because its greatest impact wasn't only found in court records. It lived on in the memories of an entire generation. Nearly 3 decades have passed since the Otokoto case shocked Nigeria. Owerri has continued to grow. New businesses have opened, new families have settled, and a new generation now walks the same streets where fear once overshadowed everyday life. Yet the name Otokoto has never completely faded. For many Nigerians, it serves as a reminder of a time when one criminal investigation changed an entire city. It also reminds us of the importance of separating facts from rumors. Over the years, countless stories have circulated about the case. Some are supported by court records and credible investigations. Others have grown through repeated retelling, becoming part of local folklore without independent evidence. That's why remembering this case responsibly matters. Not because of myths, but because of the real people whose lives were forever changed. At the center of this story was Anthony Ikechukwu Okoronkwo, an 11-year-old boy who left home one ordinary morning, expecting to return before sunset. He never did. His death sparked an investigation. That investigation ignited public outrage, and that outrage became one of the most significant moments in Owerri's modern history. The Otokoto case also left lasting lessons. It highlighted the need to protect children, to strengthen criminal investigations, and to ensure that justice is guided by evidence, due process, and the rule of law. History is often remembered through names. For Owerri, that name is Otokoto, not as a symbol of fear to be glorified, but as a reminder of why justice, truth, and the protection of innocent lives must always come first. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime and historical stories from Nigeria, Africa, and around the world. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, every story has two versions, the one people tell, and the one history can prove.